Fiona. Hi, Dave.
Hi.
Hi. I'm very happy to welcome you today to this podcast. And we are going to talk about something that touches all of us in our day to day work with clients, and it is imposter syndrome. And we met in London a couple of weeks back, and all of us kind of concurred that, this is something that we have a lot of interest in. For listeners, I want to introduce Fiona and Dave. They are executive coaches and leadership. They develop leadership programs. They're based out of UK, and I am speaking to them from Singapore. And three of us come together for a very good reason: our common love for applied neuroscience and applying the science of brain and behavior into our work, which is coaching and leadership work. So today we are going to go deep into a deep dive about imposter syndrome. But before that, I would invite Fiona and Dave to talk a little bit about their work. Yeah.
Thanks, Nandini. I'm really pleased to be doing this podcast with you today and talking about imposter syndrome. Is so important. It comes up such a lot. So just to say hi to everyone, I'm Fiona Warner-Gale. I'm the founder and director of Thinking Through Academy, and we deliver leadership development and coaching, and it's always through neuroscience lens. Neuroscience is something for the past 6 years that has really had a huge impact on not just my professional life, but on my personal life. And I think enabling people to understand how the brain works so they can actually take control and understand what's going on, especially in high performance jobs, is so important. So I'm glad to be talking about this topic today.
My name's Dave Palfreyman, and so my role is within Thinking Through is the head of coaching and applied neuroscience, and it's just such an amazing topic that gives us some real answers in what's going on for people. And I think, once we have a label, something that gives us an understanding of what's happening, then we can have a degree of control over that, and that allows us to have better outcomes and better way forward. So I think it's such an important topic, imposter syndrome. It affects so many people, men as well as women, and I'm really looking forward to this little conversation where we can dive a little deeper into some of those phenomena that's going on for people.
Excellent, Dave. So today we are going to focus our conversation on three main questions. The first one being, what does it really feel like? The imposter syndrome, how did it even get a name like this? And bringing in our experience from our own research and client work. The second question is what does science or psychology have to say about it? What does it result in? How does it affect our mind and emotions? And the last one, naturally, then what are some of the mechanisms by which we can deal with it? Because it seems a lot of us have this phenomena. So just to start off, I just wanted to read this little piece from a blog written anonymously, obviously by someone who is experiencing the symptoms. And it says that my comparisons may not be fair because my brain is my fiercest critique, and she doesn't ask for resumes before making her assertions. So this is a beautiful articulation of what it feels like, that in spite of an impressive resume, your brain may actually be categorizing you. It might be making you feel like you don't deserve, you're not worthy, and that's what it feels like. And one more qualifier was that I'm amazed at the ability of my brain to focus on the little mistakes, like an overbearing mother. But I'm learning. But I'm learning to ignore the voices in my head, do things, and occupy spaces even when I don't feel worthy enough. So this little piece, I think, starts off our discussion on imposter syndrome.
I think that's fascinating, Nandini. it just encapsulates what's going on so well that in your head it's, you know, having experienced imposter syndrome myself, even today while doing this podcast, I'm thinking, do I know enough? What are people going to think of me? I shouldn't actually be doing this. All this went through my head this morning. Should I be doing this? Am I worthy? And our brains are really our own worst critique, aren't they? You know, they're looking to self-protect. I just meet so many people who are high flyers, high performers, you know, really driven, intelligent people in lots of different walks of life, and they're having this internal dialogue. It's like the little narrative on your shoulder, similar to anxiety in some ways, isn't it? And, you know, having worked in mental health, I've picked up there are a lot of similarities to how people who have anxiety experience that, as though, you know, similar to those with imposter syndrome.
What's standing out for me there is, you know, is our, you know, our default mode network that is saying that when we're not actively engaged in you know, in thinking of a particular task, that's part of our the multiple centers in our brain that often say, you know, that relate to how we see ourselves to against other people. We use that socially in terms of what's our social standing, in terms of, you know, the crowd. Am I at the bottom of the list? Am I at the top of the list? You know, how do I fit in? Am I contributing to the group? Am I contributing enough to the group? And all of those come into play. And I guess if we're over-regulated or under-regulated and over-aroused, then we see more of that coming to the fore, don't we? There's more of that, or, you know, I'm potentially not good, or we judge ourselves against somebody else's ability and go, I've got to be able to do that, you know. You know, somebody that does a park run and runs 5k on a weekend, and then they start running with somebody that runs a marathon, and all right, you know, and then overachieve, can't, or try to achieve something that they're not necessarily ready for, and then they, you know, that then just makes them feel much worse because they then can't achieve that. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and I think, interestingly, and I think this is probably more for men than women, I think men are really bad at talking about their feelings. You know, we're really, you know, we have a, I mean, I think, you know, both men and women have there's an expectation about how we should interact socially, and I think for men it's not show weakness, it's not show fear, not show emotion, so we, you know, tamp that down, we hide it, we disguise it, so, you know, yeah, everything's going fine, and, you know, underneath we're maybe not quite as fine as we feel we should, but we daren't show that. And I think that's the same, you know, with imposter syndromes. You have to show that you're capable, have to show that, you know, that you're not making mistakes, for fear of being found out that you're not good enough, that you're not capable, that we can't, you know, we can't ask for help, and then that cycle just perpetuates, doesn't it, until, you know, we burn out, or, you know, we make a major mistake, and then we have a problem that we then need to deal with.
That's really interesting, Dave, from getting that perspective from you in a room dominated by women. I love that. I love that you shared that. And I think it's something for us to think about, isn't it? You know, as we start to recognize some of this collection of symptoms almost. It's a syndrome, so therefore it's describing a collection of things that are happening for us. And in some of the conversations we three have had, we're thinking, you know, people are feeling this way and that way. What does it actually mean? You know, and in terms of imposter syndrome, you're right, we're comparing ourselves to other people. But I feel those that I've been working with, it feels like it's almost like they're not part of a tribe. I'm just thinking about some of the women high flyers that I've worked with in, you know, in sort of science, in astrophysics, who are in a world of men. Often, in a big group of, in the leadership team, in the C-suite, there'll be majority of men and a couple of women, and they are feeling like they don't quite have a seat at the table. That may or may not be actually true because they're there, but that's what their brain's telling them. And I think it's that it's almost like a defense mechanism to be self-critical and to sort of put your barriers up and go, actually, I see all those academics in the room and that's not me. Often it is them, but they can't unpick that to see it. So I'm thinking about psychological safety there, not just internally, but thinking about how we develop that in a group to get people to understand what's happening.
Fiona, the last time we spoke, I remember you mentioned a situation where just by virtue of maybe gender or perceived place in the hierarchy of the organization, you noticed how women, when they entered the boardroom, their body language changed, and they actually, the share of voice just reduced on its own, and that connection that we were making with imposter syndrome and what's going on over there. And actually the interesting thing is that there is, while it started, this interest in imposter syndrome started, I think, in 1985 as I was reading. But it had initially started as an investigation into how high-functioning women feel, but eventually this theory has been sort of negated because men, as Dave said, also have the same experience, but they just don't talk about it as much. And apparently there is a resource called the IP scale, which is available freely on the internet, and it was made by somebody called Pauline Rose Clance, who is a psychotherapist herself based out of Atlanta, and she offers it free to anybody who wants to work on their thing. So one of the things that we talked about is panic and anxiety as symptoms before perhaps a big event, or speaking at a conference, or doing a big project, or delivering like a big presentation. And what could be happening in a neurobiological sense, like all the panic and anxiety means obviously the brain's energy goes in managing the panic and anxiety, and there is little energy therefore left to be creative. And then there's so much stress on the person to appear calm, collected, and like she or he has everything under control in front of a large crowd. So what have been some of your experiences in terms of how the psychology or the brain science works there?
Yeah, we've been looking into this a lot, because I think being able to understand what's going on in the brain goes some way to helping you sort of combat the feelings of imposter syndrome. And I think, the people I work with do describe this feeling of anxiety, of not being worthy. And when we look at how anxiety works in the brain, it's telling us there's a perceived threat, therefore it's activating our survival system. The amygdala is firing. What then happens is that the prefrontal cortex it's not as effective then. So all of our executive thinking and function happens there. It means that we don't have that ability to think clearly, to make decisions. And I think it's the interplay between the two as well, because I think the prefrontal cortex does a lot of self-evaluation. It is our critical friend. And when you're getting heightened anxiety, you're probably, not enabling it to think through what's going on. It's, we're getting this, actually, I'm hyper alert, my limbic system's firing, I don't feel safe. Everyone around me seems to be far better than I am from what I can see, even though I don't know that. But actually I want to take myself out of the situation. And I've seen, some people actually shut down, not speak in meetings and things because of that. And then they'll come to me after and they're like, I just don't feel part of this group. When you think about the brain being a social organ, we know that we're better in groups. We survive better in groups. We're so sort of advanced at doing that. Is if you're on the periphery of that group, then that's going to put you in a negative frame of reference as well. So actually it's quite debilitating when you think about that. So it's about trying to unpick what's happening in the brain, I think.
There's a few things that were going on in my head while you were saying, talking about that. What we know is happening is that we have a sympathetic and a parasympathetic nervous system, and what the sympathetic nervous system does is we hear, we know that more commonly when we talk about fight or flight system, and and we think about that as a bad thing, but actually it's not necessarily a bad thing, in that our arousal happens when we're getting ready for a meeting, we're getting ready for going and doing some activity, and that's a good thing. It gets us fired up, it gets us ready to do something a little bit more stressful. And actually, and again, I think it's also a relatively common thing is the notion of a little bit of stress is good for us, and it's when it goes too far that we then become overwhelmed and then we can't operate effectively. And that's when, as Fiona quite rightly saying, our prefrontal cortex then starts to get disconnected and left, sort of shunted off to one side, metaphorically, so that we can go into this protection mode of defending ourselves, and then we can't, we struggle to think or to remember things effectively and clearly.
And actually, I like that, Dave. I was just sorry for interjecting, but I'm just thinking about what you said about stress being our friend, and I know Amy Edmondson's done quite a bit on that. I think that's fascinating. But one of the things that I think I've learned over the years, having worked in mental health as well, is stress doesn't always feel good, even if it is being our friend. So until we can learn to sort of identify what is going on, why do I feel, shaky? Why is my mouth dry? Why is my stomach hurting? Until we know what's going on and go, actually, I'm experiencing anxiety and stress. Okay, let's reframe that. I think it then becomes something that adds to our negative bias.
Yeah.
So it's almost trying to pick that up and catch it before it gets into overwhelm, isn't it? And go, I think you were saying earlier, Nandini, it's about turning it into I feel excited. And I recognise all of those feelings today when I came on this podcast. It's not my favourite thing to do. Oh, it might be after today, but I was a little scared. I was feeling nervous. And you said that, and actually that put me at my ease. But imposter syndrome, you've got to learn to evaluate how you're feeling and reframe it, and don't always be your critique. Be the scientist of your own experience. You can change this around, but it's learning to do that, isn't it? I think that was a great point there, Dave.
Yes.
I think that with you saying there about reframing, I love this idea of reframing. And I think, when we, if we're going into a meeting, we're about to go and stand in front of a group of people at a lectern and do a talk or, a podcast, and we're getting that anxiety state, we're getting that arousal state that's going on. But actually, I think a really good reframe for that is go, I'm excited about this, because that's what that's doing is that's changing my outlook at this, to go, I'm not anxious about it, I'm excited to do this. And actually that's then a controlling mechanism to allow us to to have a degree of control. And I think anything that gives us a degree of control, we can add to that.
Yes.
And it stops us from being overwhelmed, and then we can you can add, and the more you do that, the more exposure you do that, then over time, that thing that we do that brings us anxiety becomes easier to manage, because what we're then doing is we still have the arousal state, but we're not as aroused for as long. So instead of it, we're aroused, we have an arousal moment rather than I can't tolerate that.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that word in, which is excitement. In the London Protocol of Emotions, which the Iron Consulting is it's a proprietary framework for looking at emotions. Excitement is the switching emotion. And I must acknowledge Dr. Paul Brown here. He always talked about it, that the excitement is the switching emotion from going from a survival state to a thriving state. Your nervous system cannot go from survival into thriving without, this. And excitement is relatively easier for people to bring in. And I love the point you made about this giving a sense of autonomy to the person, which really helps in controlling the nervous system and then, moving forward. And of course, the other thing that I experience a lot myself, as well as, I tell my clients, is to work at it by just focusing on the micro tasks needed to get to the ultimate. Because if we try to handle everything at one go, then it kind of activates the default mode network, because you start going into spins about what if this doesn't happen, what if that doesn't happen, or you think a lot about your past and you keep worrying whether you will be taken seriously. At least that happens to me, because I made a career switch, and this constant thinking about the past is one of the things that gets into my inner story. But then we have to constantly remind ourselves as to what have we done well so far, and look at little steps. So for example, for today, just being on a podcast with the two of you was my micro step moment to sort of go on to the next thing. So the other thing is, of course, breathing, breathing and rooting yourself in the moment and being completely authentic and aligned to your truth. Another coping mechanism, I would say, is practice, because our neural networks just get strengthened with doing more of the same. And, it's highly recommended. And even if, for example, for speeches, my grandfather would say that you have to practice in front of a mirror. And the old saying is absolutely true. We practice in front of the mirror, and our neural pathways actually get they get stronger, and they get sort of it becomes easier to perform. So anything else about coping, or actually converting the anxious energy into some kind of strength? Is there anything around that?
Some of the things I've been thinking about around imposter syndrome, I kind of see it in three areas. It's a syndrome of safety, satisfaction, and connection.
Lovely.
And in all of those areas, I think we're erring on the side of negativity. So the key here is that mindset shift that you're talking about. But shifting mindset takes work, because I think when we're in survival mode, we tend to inhabit the protective end of a continuum. And as you say, I love that about practice. I think practice is so important. And I think it needs to come from a place of your story. Who are you really? Because actually what we're doing is we're losing our identity in imposter syndrome, because we're seeing others, not ourselves. And I think that's the place to start, from my perspective. Anyways, when I've been either, doing leadership training or coaching, is get to know your real self, because until you do know yourself, you can't move into a place of feeling stronger and feeling more positive. And actually that sort of desire for self-protection in imposter syndrome will carry on until you can sit comfortably with who you are, but you also need to be able to sit with a little discomfort to be able to move forward. So I think that's the starting place for me. Recognizing what's going on for you, naming your emotions at a granular level. Until we're able to do that, I don't think we can choose the path that we want to go on in. And I'm talking about path in a lot of ways, but path neurally, reinforcing our neural pathways. We need to start from a firm place. And I think it's practicing that, even if every day you write down where your strengths are, it needs to be part of your internal dialogue. And if you need coaching to do that, fabulous. It's a place that we start with our leadership students as well is what is the leader I want to be? Who am I in relation to that? And what's my journey to get there? So I think that's the starting place for me.
Fiona, I love the word identity, and I think that to a large extent for me explains the panic and anxiety, because any kind of identity shift, we know this, creates a lot of anxiety in adults especially. So if very strong beliefs and are associated, and emotions are associated with one kind of identity, in midlife, when you have a change, this kind of anxiety can come about very easily.
I think the different stages in life that you go through for both men and women, but speaking as a woman, that change from, me as an individual to, if you do have children, me as a mother, me as a business owner, me as an older woman, and all these young people that are around, it's like, I don't know, it's like being on a DNA strand almost. It's sort of spiral into the next part of your life. And I think always remind yourself who you are and where you're going to. That helps me a lot, I think, being able to say, what can I do? Why do people want to talk to me? Why am I sat here? I'm sat here for a reason. I didn't just walk into a room accidentally. It's those sort of things, isn't it?
We see everything for the first time, and we live in an existence of wonder of this is really interesting, or this is really interesting. And as we get older, we gain more and more experience, we gain more and more information, more and more knowledge about the world around us and situations that happen, and so we see things become less wondrous, if I stick with that phrase, as we progress, because we've been there, we've seen it, we've done it, and so I think the other side of that is there's an expectation that as we get older that we know more stuff, and I think arguably we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to, I need to know this, I should know this, I should, and to say, I don't, invites a level of weakness, doesn't it? And I a lot of the people that I coach, and I remember this as a new coach there was a turning point where I, as a coach, was able to say, do you know what, I feel really stuck in this conversation, and and saying that for the very first time in a coaching session felt really difficult. But I went, you know what, I'm gonna just try this. I'm gonna just give it a go, and rather than that spiral, what happened was the client said, me too, and that just felt really liberating, because it was like, okay, so how do we unstuck ourselves from this? How do we move? And so we started to then explore an opportunity for, well, what are the options? What could we do? How can we move? And I use the royal we quite a lot in coaching, but what I mean is, what are they going to do? But it gives us a sense of us moving together, doesn't it? Of, they're not on their own in whatever the problem that they face. And once we tackle that, once we point out the elephant in the room as a great metaphor, once we kind of express that stuckness, that I don't know, then then that frees us up to say, well, actually, let's explore what are our options, what can we do? And that suddenly becomes really empowering, because then we don't necessarily need to be an expert. It's okay almost to be a beginner again in that conversation, in that knowledge gap. And, well, how might we find some knowledge? How might we grow that? And there's a great little formula that we use in coaching, by a chap called Tim Galway, that says, our performance is our potential minus the interference that goes on inside us, and we can grow our performance through knowledge and education, and with a coach, or with a bit of training and practice, we can damp down that internal interference that goes on, that allows us to then stop saying, I can't, I don't know how, to, okay, well, let's explore this, or, who can help me with this? Who can help us move forward? Who needs to be involved in my plan? And then, it stops becoming it's all about me, and becomes a wider network.
That's amazing, Dave. It's bringing me to the, when I was talking about those 3 areas earlier, the one of connection. And I think what happens in imposter syndrome is that lack of connection, which we know brains really, really need, but also an erosion of trust in other people. Mm. And therefore, erosion in things like oxytocin, how we relate to other people. Thinking that, we're on the periphery, so we've got sort of social pain. We're experiencing social pain. We know when we're isolated from people, and whether that's real or imagined, we actually feel pain in the same brain receptor areas as you do when you feel physical pain. That's immense. How do we recover from that? That can push us into a real feeling of isolation, and feeling that we're not part of a tribe, can have a big impact on us. And I think, the part about how we join up with our clients, that, that Me Too idea is that we feel like we're then part of a tribe. And I think really I'd urge people with imposter syndrome to find their tribe. I think today I'm with my tribe. Mm-hmm. We met Nandini. It was the most wonderful thing when we met on LinkedIn, Nandini, and we started to talk. And I think finding people like that is like gold. But stick with them, because you can have the conversations openly and authentically together about how things affect you. But at the same time, you're helping your brain with that social connection. And there's one person I was working with, again, in science and technology, and she just felt so disconnected because her group that she was with, like I was saying earlier, were academics and technical people. And she was a program and project manager, and an awesome one. And she was at C-suite level, but she didn't feel that she should be there. She wasn't worthy of these people. And I said, you're there for a reason, and that is because of your skill about leading big programs. And she said, I never thought about it like that. I said, but what you probably need is a tribe of other people who do similar things to connect to. So we did a bit of Googling, and we found women in STEM, in technology and science groups. There's a global one. She started to talk to them, and you've got that connection. And so being in that group empowers you then, and helps you with your mindset. So I think, that's great. Knowing that there's somebody that resonates with you,
Yes,
it's that
yes.
old adage, isn't it? Strength in numbers.
Yes, no, true. And the conversations actually open us up to new possibilities and even new knowledge. And it's not like big knowledge, but the little bits of knowledge which help us to fine tune our own hypotheses and our own learnings. That is immensely valuable. The other interesting concept that both of you have referred to is in common parlance, it's now neuroplasticity. It's like the experience can change your mind, it can change your thinking, and therefore the conversations can change the way you think or you feel, and therefore that neuroplasticity itself allows us to access compassion as well as understanding from other people, and helps us to deal with this syndrome. And I think coaches understand this; they know how to use it. But my wish is for the world to understand it and understand how valuable good conversations can be. To open your mind to new possibilities. And also, the other word that comes to my mind, and we haven't touched upon it so far, is self-compassion. Like, absolutely. I feel, people in these positions who experience these kind of symptoms, and it's not just very senior people. I know young people also go through tremendous amount of imposter syndrome, and it's also termed perfectionism by people, and a little bit of self-compassion would go a long way in sort of dealing with it in the moment. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think one of the things that we're not very good at as human beings is self-compassion, is being kind to yourself. And we don't tend to treat ourselves in the same way that we might treat somebody else. So I think the practice of compassion is really important for people with imposter syndrome. It's about being able to acknowledge that what you're feeling is probably shared with a lot of, amongst a lot of people. And we don't have to be so self-deprecating. We don't have to be negative all the time. Give yourself a break sort of thing. But I think practicing compassion is really important. Being mindful of how you're feeling and finding ways out of that, just being able to take a pause. I have something called the leadership pause. I talk to my students about it on our leadership programs, is to just, when it feels tough, when you're getting into the zone of, self-criticism, take a pause, step away. And I sometimes say, go outside, have a chat with yourself, come back in when you feel a bit better. Say that to my daughter as well. But yeah, I think that's really important. And I think neuroplasticity, as well, as you were saying, is, I love neuroplasticity. Can't say it, but I love it, because what it's made me realize is that I do have control over my own destiny. And all of that, when you're a sponge, when you're a child, that's amazing. All that wonder, all that learning, we start to prune it away as we get older. The brain wants to become more efficient. But I think if we can keep curiosity and wonder and lifelong learning all the way through our lives, that actually enables us to shape the brain that we want it to. And I was watching a YouTube video the other day about this project where they put sort of fMRI sensors on the head, and they can enable a person to control their pain center, people with chronic pain. It made me think that actually we could do that in so many ways with other things. I'm thinking coaching, I'm thinking therapy. I mean, we don't have to go full on fMRI, but I'm thinking actually if we know that, we can start to work on those things that contribute to it. And we can strengthen our neural pathways, and we can pare back on those that aren't helpful, because the less we use a neural pathway, the less prominent it becomes in the way that we think and behave. So it's just such an amazing revelation to me when I started to look at neuroscience. I was like, this is awesome. I can shape my brain. Just need to practice that.
Yes. One of the things that people stop doing in, and I know you don't because you're a lifelong learner, and probably Dave is too, and I'm too, but is learning new skills, because that gives your brain the practice of learning and feeling vulnerable. Your brain feels vulnerable for a while that, oh, I don't know this, but I can learn. And then once you learn and you're able to do it, your brain actually probably pats itself on its back and says, hey, I could do it. And therefore I can do many more things. And just that, I think, builds a lot of confidence in learning new things and doing new things.
Yeah. And it does, our brain does. When we get a sense of achievement, we get a dopamine hit. Dopamine is the feel-good chemical, isn't it? And that's, so, when we've done something that we get a great sense of achievement for, we have a bit of a dopamine hit. We do that again and again, we then, that becomes, it becomes something that we're successful at, that then ups our serotonin, our, just general feel good, as opposed to reward dopamine. Dopamine's a reward hormone. But yeah, so all of these things then give us these kicks, these hits that actually just allow us to feel good about ourselves, feel, and get a sense of achievement. So yeah, so anything that does that then is clearly a good thing that we ought to kind of try and replicate. And actually, that's one thing our brain constantly does, doesn't it? We talked about this about the brain being a risk reward. It's very much focused in one of two things: trying to minimize risk as much as possible and maximize anything that gives us the reward. And let's do that because that makes me feel good. So I want to do more of that. I
think what's really interesting, I was reading about what happens in the brain of a person with imposter syndrome around reward. There's been quite a bit of research about this, and it's been found in some research that the dopamine system, so the typical dopamine surge that we would get with reward, doesn't spike as much in people with imposter syndrome. And it's almost like they've unlearned, so to speak, I know it's a hormone, but unlearned how to get reward and wonder out of things. And at the same time, because of not feeling like they're not deserving, they also have lower serotonin levels. And actually, I'm not saying imposter syndrome is a mental illness, but when you look at anxiety and depression, those same things occur. And what we have to do is relearn and practice where to get our rewards from and how to experience them in a good way.
Yeah.
And that's simple oversimplification really, but it's also moving away from that negativity bias through some of the things we were talking about earlier, that reframing, that practice, that who am I really, that moving towards a growth mindset. So it's fascinating really how it all comes into play, and actually, the neurobiological essence of this is key to unlocking how we get out of it. So understanding that is key.
Yes. One of the things that I just wanted to mention before maybe in a few minutes we'll wrap up is there has been work done on the usefulness of imposter syndrome, and that in organizations it does lead to higher levels of skill and also better team dynamics, because it seems someone has studied that if you have this, you try to actually understand other people more and get along better with your teammates. I can imagine that happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we've covered like a lot of ground with, what exactly it feels like, and what are some of the things that we can do in a useful way, and also why we should reframe, the situation. I think we've gotten quite deep into that, like why we should reframe what's happening in our neurobiology and, the concepts of neuroplasticity, compassion, new learning, etc. This really helps us to find our own coping mechanisms, and of course everybody will find a different way, because all of us are so uniquely different. And just one more thing I wanted to say was that no one should self-label themselves, because it is not a psychiatric condition. Imposter syndrome is not there in the DSM, so it's not listed as a psychiatric condition. So it's not something that one cannot work on or cannot deal with. Definitely. So
Absolutely.
Yes. So, I mean, I always tell my clients that even if you do 10 units of work on a particular issue, self work, that has an outsized benefit rather than you do zero. So, it's about doing the small things, and you don't have to do a lot of things, but just start small and, keep at it.
I love that, Nandini. I love the fact that actually, if we switch around imposter syndrome from negative to positive, actually it has benefits for all of us, doesn't it? So it's just a collection of recognizing what's going on, but actually helping us to drive into growth mindset, into learning new things, into curiosity, individually and as a team. That has massive benefit.
If we can keep talking about it, we find somebody that we can talk, a mentor, a coach, a trusted colleague, then by expressing that gives us, and because that's the other thing is when we start to speak aloud, we start to order our thoughts, and once we start to order our thoughts, then we can start to granulate what's going on and get a better label. And then we can move forward, can't we? So I think there's something really important about that. The other thing that kind of stands out for me, in terms of reframing, is the thing I think is really important is that imposter syndrome is the price we pay for entry into the high achievers club, because they're exactly the same. There's a huge crossover, isn't it? We talk about perfectionism. We talk about needing to get it right. We need the driving forward, the working long hours, be seen to be the best, not making mistakes. They're exactly the same. You can put them up one against the other. And so, I would say to anybody that's experiencing imposter syndrome, well, congratulations. That clearly shows that you're a high achiever. Because if you weren't bothered about the work,
you wouldn't
be bothered. Yeah.
That's a lovely summary, Dave, to our conversation, today, that it is the entry ticket to the High Achievers Club. So feel proud of it.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. It's been wonderful having you and having this chat, and I hope that the listeners find this a useful resource for themselves, and they can they can see that they're not alone in this, and there are ways to cope and deal with this phenomena. And Dave, as you said, it's the entry ticket to the High Performers Club, so that's something to be proud of. So thank you very much for doing this together, and any last thoughts?
Thank you, Nandini. It's just been a great experience. Actually, one that I was quite nervous about, and now I feel exhilarated. So I think when you do sit with a little discomfort, but you go into it with an open mind, and that's for anyone with imposter syndrome, and you learn that actually it can be different. It's great. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
I just want to echo Fiona. It's been a great conversation. it's always learning, isn't it? So I think we've had a great, I've learned things from this, as well as I hope that, the audience finds it useful.
All right, lovely. Thank you.